Welcome back to another Excel VBA tutorial. And we are continuing on with our exploration of the slicer object from the perspective of Excel. In our previous video, we at least went over a brief overview about what a slicer is, kind of the benefits of them, and really why you might want to add one into your Excel workbook. And then we started going through the process of actually writing some of the code that was necessary in order to create a slicer. And so we've seen so far that slicers, they kind of behave like pivot tables where you have to do this process where you create a cache first. And then once you have that cache, then you can actually create the slicer. So they behave very similar to what we've seen with pivot tables. And we've also now encountered our first bug as well. So we've seen that for whatever reason, it doesn't seem to take named arguments very well. It seems to cause all sorts of issues. And we've also seen that some of the documentation actually differs to what you would actually experience if you recorded a macro. So if you recorded a macro, you would have add to, but in the documentation it says add. And so that just adds to the confusion. So what we're going to do in this video is we are going to create a few slicers. Keep in mind, it's a little bit tedious and there's very easy to be prone to error, but very useful, very helpful. And then we're going to go through formatting slicers. And then we're going to also walk through just some of the ways we can customize them and even do things like select items and stuff like that. We're not going to be able to cover everything, but these would be, I'd say, at least are some of the core things that would be nice to know when it comes to working with slicers. So that's the plan for this video. So first things first, let's jump back into our Visual Basic editor. I think I had a typo on the last video. So I think I had slicer and it was supposed to be slicers, caches. And so this should match basically what we're seeing up here. So very important that that's the same. You want to make sure that it's, consistent. I'm going to make my life a little bit easier by putting option explicit up at the explicit T up at the top. This will make it where if I misspell something, I should be able to catch it with relative ease. Okay, so we've seen here, if we want, we can create a cache, and then with that cache, we need to specify a Pokemon table, so that's our data source. Additionally, we need to specify a name, so the name of that cache, of the field that we want to use in the cache, or at least from the table that we want to put into the cache. And then we can give a behind the scenes name that we can assign to this cache. And once you have that cache, you can create a slicer. So create a slicer from the cache. So we're going to set the Excel Pokemon name slicer, so the actual slicer object, equal to the Excel Pokemon slicer cache. There is a slicers collection that represents all the slicers that belong to that cache. So you can actually create multiple slicers from the same cache. You can also see that there's some other objects that are kind of nice too, which is you can do things like slicer cache levels, slicer cache types, all sorts of different things, slicer items. That's going to be a fun one once we get to it. We're not going to cover all the objects, but most of them. Okay, and then we can take and add a slicer to that slicers collection. And then this is where things get fun. So the first one is we're going to set the destination. The destination is a little bit of another bug. So if you do a macro record, it will usually default to the active sheet. So the sheet that you're currently on. However, if you are in VBA, the documentation says that you can pass through a worksheet object and it should be okay. For whatever reason, that doesn't seem to be the case. So what you have to do is if you're going to reference a worksheet object, you don't pass through the worksheet object itself, you pass through the worksheet object name. So to give you an idea of that, I already have a sheet reference called Excel Active Sheet that represents the sheet called Pokemon Data. Here, if I put through the name, then it seems to work okay. If I don't pass through the name, it will not work. However, I'm going to reiterate it again. If you were to do a macro record, it would actually use just active sheet, that seems to be fine. Don't ask why. I thought active sheet actually returns a worksheet object. To my knowledge, it does, so I don't know why that one behaves a little bit differently. The next thing is going to be the name. So this is the behind the scenes name for the slicer. So in this case, I'm going to call it Pokemon Slicer name. And then from here, I'm going to go to the next line. We can have a caption. So this is what the user would see at the top of the slicer. So this would be like, if I go back to my little table, this would be my caption. So in this case, Pokemon card rarity represents the caption. In this case, I want to put Pokemon name. This is the name. And then we can position the slicer as well. So this is where fun begins. So we've seen with other things, we have to do things in points. That can be a little bit confusing. Nice thing about Excel is there's application, inches to points. So we can pass through the inches value for it, and then it will convert it to points for us. So in this situation, I want to do 1.75, and then I need to do left, again, application, inches to points, and then 4 points. No, is it that one? Oh, I think I have the wrong one. That's why. I have the wrong notes. That's always a good start. This one's going to be 0.2. 0.2. And then the next one is going to be the width. This will be application, inches to points, and then it will be 2.01. Close it off, little underscore, and then height equals application, inches to points, and then 1.18. And then we are good to go. And so basically you repeat this process multiple times where you create a slicer and you're just changing basically the name. Now, I'm not going to bore you with typing the same thing out over and over again and then just changing little things here and there. The idea is exactly the same. The only thing that's really changing is the field that you're selecting, and then you're just making sure that the name's changed to reflect the field that you're working with. So I'm going to take some code that I already have written out just to, again, make our video a little bit faster. I don't think it's entirely necessary to see everything that I'm about to show you, but I will walk through it with you just to show you what we're doing with the code. Again, it will be available on GitHub as well, so don't feel like you have to pause the video and type everything out. This will all be here so for you to access. Okay, so the second slicer is for my rarity field. You can see here, I'm just basically doing the same exact thing. I'm just simply going in there and changing it. I have to be a little bit careful though, because I can see I've already have some spelling things that I have to be aware of. Nice little trick if you're not familiar with it, as you can see here, if I do the little component like this, it seems to behave definitely more appropriately. So I have one for my rarity column, I have one for my set column, so my card set, and then I have one for my series, the card series. And again, same action. You create a cache, you then create the slicer from the cache, you give it a caption, you give it a name, you give it its dimensions. So very repetitive, same exact process. I'm literally just changing a few different things on each level. So nothing hopefully too confusing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create the slicers now. So I'm going to actually slip this over here, and then I'm going to delete this, I'm going to delete this, and I'm going to delete this. Let's run it. Hopefully no errors. Oh, no errors. That's surprising. There's usually errors. So you can see here, I have 4 different slicers. Looks like the dimensions were off for that one. That's okay. That's fine. But you can see here, I have one for each item in my little slicer. Now, what I want to do from here is we're going to see how we can format some of these slicers. So I'm not going to format all of them. I'm just going to format one, and we'll see how we can loop through and kind of do what I call bulk formatting. So changing multiple formats at once. So the first thing I want to do is I want to take my rarity slicer and change the number of columns. So change the number of columns on my rarity slicer, So how do I do that? I'm going to first reference that particular slicer. So in this case, rarity slicer, Control J just to make sure it's there. And then there is a number of columns property. This determines the number of columns in that slicer. So you can have either one column, which is by default, or you can have 3 columns. So it makes it, if you want to spread it out, a little bit easier to read. Sometimes that's nice to do, especially if you have a lot of items. In this case, I want to have 3 columns. Additionally, I can do some other things. I can sort the items inside of that slicer. So I can sort the items in the rarity slicer. I'm going to take, again, my Pokemon rarity slicer. There is a, what do they call it? Sort items, or no. I have to go to the slicer cache first. Then there is a sort items property. I can set that equal to Excel slicer sort ascending, data source order, or source descending. I want to do sort ascending. So you can see it's very customizable and you can sort it not necessarily based on the data source, but even outside of that data source as well. Additionally, there are certain features that are nice about slicers. So there's things where we've seen if that value technically doesn't exist after setting one slicer, it kind of grays out a little bit. There's other options where you can actually hide items that don't exist. I personally like doing that. I just don't like even showing the user. I just say, hey, you've selected a filter. These are your values. That's all you got. So if I want to hide those values, then what I could probably do is I can set what's something called the cross filter type. So hide values with no, or sorry, hide buttons with no value. Hide buttons with no values. And so I'm going to say Excel Pokemon rarity slicer. And then I'm going to do slicer cache cross filter type, which is down here. I'm going to set that equal to filter hide buttons with no data. That's what I want to do here. So that will hide it. Again, it will only do it for the rarity slicer. Okay. And then from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the colors of all of my slicers using a for loop. And so this is actually very helpful because they say you want to go through and change all the slicers so that way they match certain colors that you might be using. This would be kind of the way you would do it. So the first thing you need to do is you need to loop through each slicer cache. So how do we do that? We're going to say for each Excel Pokemon slicer cache in Excel Pokemon slicers caches. And then from here, I want to make sure this one's spelled correctly. It's not, see? So tricky. We're going to do next. So loop through each slicer cache, then loop through each slicer in that cache. So for each Excel Pokemon slicer in Excel Pokemon slicer cache, and then slicers cache, slicers, there's a slicers collection, and then it would be next as well. I want to make sure that's good to go. And then when you're on that slicer, guess what? You can just change the slicer style. Very simple to do. You grab your slicer just like so, and then you will see there is a slicer style just like that. And then you pass through the string of the style name. In this case, I want slicer style light 2. Ugh, so many tongue twisters today. Okay, so let's see what this does. So you can see all it did is it changed it to that orange color. We can see here, everything still seems to look pretty much identical, but we also notice here now we have 3 columns vice 1. So very helpful. Now we're going to go to setting the slicer value. So this is where things, I was a little bit surprised. I thought there would be an easier way to do this, but I guess not. So the easiest way to do this is just use a for loop where you unselect everything and then select the one that you want. That's from what I can tell. There doesn't seem to be a unselect all option. There's a select all option, so you can select every item, but you can't unselect every item. So from what I've been able to tell is loop through each item and then basically set it equal to false. And so what you would do is you do for each Excel slicer item, in, and then you need to specify the slicer that you want to work with. So in this case, I'm going to do Excel Pokemon set, and then I want the slicer cache, and then slicer items, and then next. So a couple things I need to do up here is I need to declare a new variable, Excel slicer item, as a slicer item object. And then from here, I'm going to loop through each slicer item in the slicer items collection, and then tab in, set the selected property equal to false. So Excel slicer item, there is a selected property, set it equal to false. Let's see what this does. I'm gonna clear this, clear this, clear this, clear this, run it again. Ooh, I don't like that. Ugh. That is not good at all. So here's what I would say. That seems like really messy. I would not do that. So Excel slicer item dot name. Let's say we want to set this equal to the base one. So if it equals base, let's do this. So if Excel slicer name equals base, then we'll say Excel slicer item dot selected equals true, else we'll have it equal false. I don't know. I didn't like that. That really took a long time, which is kind of scary. So if the name matches, then select it. Okay. And then actually, I want to see something because I swear I just read something. This is a little bit different. Yes. Oof. God. This is where things can get really messy, and I don't like that. I'm going to look at something different. Okay, I guess. That just seems really messy. Okay. I guess worst case scenario, you could just have the user select it. I might change the code on this a little bit when I finish the video because I don't know. I don't like that solution. That seems really messy. What happened? Oh, that's because I need to delete it first. Yeah, you can kind of see here. I mean, it's not taking forever. It's just, I really don't like that that's taking that long to do it. So you can see it's doing it like the way we want it to. It's just, it seems to not really work the best way. So that is a way to do it. You could also, so basically if you do like a macro recording one, what it's going to do is it's literally going to list out every value in that slicer, and it's going to either have it selected equal to false or true. So you could do that as well. So you could do something like this where you could say, okay, for my Excel Pokemon rarity, where is it? Rarity slicer cache dot slicer item, or we'll do this with that end with. I mean, you could do something like this. The only thing I don't like about this is if you do that, you'd have to know each one in advance. So you'd have to do like selected equals true. So I'm going to comment this one out just to show you and not have to have you wait each time. But you see kind of the problem. Here, it's already caused an issue where if you have it selected, it's not going. It's selecting a promise. It's selected everybody else, which is a problem. So those are just some things you're going to have to be a little bit aware of. The other big thing that you can kind of tell too, sorry, not that. I don't want to do that. I'll run it again so you can see it, but it's selecting it. The problem is everything's selected. So the problem is nothing else was unselected. So the item we have selected, it doesn't matter. So I can do something like, hey, if I do selected equals false, then guess what happens? It makes it where that's not selected anymore. So you can see here, it's not selected now. So, different options. I mean, this is a way of doing it. The problem is it looks like it's recalculating or something. It's going through each record, which is quite odd, and doing something like that. So I'll do a little bit more research on it, seeing if there's maybe a better way of doing that. But right now, that's kind of been my solution that I found is you can loop through. It just depends on how large the data set is. That could take a little bit. It might just be a little bit better where, the user would kind of do something like that, or you would have to maybe do like a macro record. Maybe that would probably be an easier option too, is like, because for example, if I do this and I say, okay, hey, I just want to have this selected, maybe something like that. And then you could see here that might be something too, if it's a little bit easier, and then you would just copy and paste this code. Different options. Not going to say that's necessarily the best, but it could be a nicer workaround than what I just showed you. But yeah, I think at this point that does it for this video. So if you have any questions about kind of how to use slicers, where they could be advantageous, feel free to put them down in the comments below. I might do another video where we explore slicers a little bit more, and we'll talk just more about certain functionality, like doing something like this, multi-select, or clearing filters, or things like that. But you can kind of tell looking at the methods, they're pretty straightforward. So you can do like, okay, clear all filters, clear manual filters, delete a slicer. A lot of these seem, pretty similar to other objects we worked with. So if you've worked with those videos before, this should kind of tell you. But I think maybe one more video, if anything. But this was more focused on the interaction. So again, if you have any questions about kind of the interaction aspect of a slicer, feel free to put those down in the comments below. Otherwise, we'll see you in the next video.